After 3 decades of silence between my sister and me, she chose to welcome me home with a sign that felt like a slap in the face. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I stood frozen in the bustling airport terminal, the handle of my carry-on bag digging into my palm. It had been 30 years. 30 years of meticulously building a new life for myself hundreds of miles away from this town. 30 years of becoming Arthur Norton, a respected pediatrician, a father to a wonderful son, a man who had survived. Yet, in that single moment, I was 16 all over again, exposed and vulnerable. Frances stood about 20 feet away, still tall but with her once dark hair now streaked with gray. The coldness in her eyes, however, was exactly as I remembered it. They were the same eyes that had watched impassively as I packed a bag. The same eyes that held no flicker of protest while our mother ordered me out of the house for good. The crudely lettered cardboard sign in her hands wasn't some twisted attempt at a joke. It was a clear declaration of war. Welcome, disappointment. Travelers hurried past, their faces a mix of curiosity and awkward pity as they glanced from her sign to my stunned expression. Some even slowed their pace, eager to witness the family drama unfolding. I drew a deep breath, straightened my spine, and began the long walk toward her, the beat of my heart thundering like a drum in my ears. "Frances," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Charming as ever." She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," she said flatly. "Thought you'd find another excuse to abandon us." "Mom died," I stated, the words tasting like ash. "What did you expect me to do?" Frances scoffed, finally lowering the sign. "What you've always done? Nothing." Without another word, she turned and strode toward the exit. "The car's this way, unless you'd rather call a taxi." I followed her, swallowing the bitter retorts that burned my throat. This reunion wasn't about her. It was about Mom. It was about finding closure and putting things to rest properly. And, most importantly, it was about the thick manila envelope tucked securely in my suitcase, the one thing I possessed that held the power to shatter her world, the one thing that would make her beg for my forgiveness. The drive to our childhood home was thick with a silent, suffocating tension. The familiar landmarks of Oak Ridge slid past the car window like ghosts from a former life. There was the high school where I had been named valedictorian, the park by the river where I'd shared my first kiss, the old stone church where Dad's funeral had been held, a service I was never told about until it was over. "Town's changed," I finally murmured, breaking the heavy silence. "Not as much as you have." I saw Frances's knuckles whiten as she gripped the steering wheel. "Arthur Norton, M.D., big city doctor. Too important for your roots." I turned to really look at my sister for the first time in 30 years. The bitter lines etched around her mouth, the rigid tension in her jaw time hadn't softened her. If anything, it had hardened her resolve, encasing her in an armor of resentment. "I sent cards every Christmas," I said quietly. "Birthday cards, too, for years." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" "It's the truth." "Your version of it," she shot back. We pulled into the driveway of the old Victorian house we grew up in. It looked smaller than I remembered, fragile. The blue paint was faded and peeling, and the garden, once Mom's pride and joy, was now an overgrown tangle of weeds. "Mom's funeral is tomorrow," Frances said, killing the engine. "You've got the guest room." Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly, as she added, "Stephen and the kids are coming over for dinner. They're curious about their uncle, the one who could never be bothered to meet them." The sheer unfairness of her words struck me like a physical blow. "Frances, you know, that's not—" "Save it," she cut me off, climbing out of the car. "We both know why you left, And we both know why you stayed away. Let's not pretend this is some happy reunion." I sat in the passenger seat, watching her walk up to the house, the screen door slamming shut behind her with a sound of finality. Her twisted version of the past echoed in my mind. She had no idea what truly happened 3 decades ago. She didn't know that Mom had tracked me down 5 years after I left, that we had tentatively, carefully, begun to rebuild our relationship. She didn't know I had been sending money every month to help with Mom's mounting medical bills after her stroke, or that Mom had been gathering the courage to finally tell Francis everything. My hand instinctively went to my pocket, feeling the solid outline of my phone. 3 missed calls from my son, checking to see if I'd landed safely. A call from my real life, pulling me back from this vortex of the past. But inside my suitcase, the envelope waited. Mom's letters, the amended will, the proof of the truth that Francis had kept buried for decades. I could turn the car around right now, drive back to the airport, and leave her to fester in her bitterness and lies. But I was done running. I was done being the family disappointment. Tomorrow, after we laid our mother to rest, my sister would finally learn what disappointment truly meant. Mom's funeral was exactly as she would have wanted it. Simple, dignified, and with no excessive displays of emotion. The small church was filled with faces I vaguely recognized, now aged and weathered by the years I'd been away. Some people offered respectful nods. Others whispered behind their funeral programs, "That's him, the son who ran off. 30 years without visiting his own mother." I heard Frances had to pay for everything herself. I sat alone in the front pew, painfully aware of the chasm of empty space between Frances and me. Her husband, Stephen, a blond, tight-lipped man, sat beside her, occasionally placing a supportive hand on her knee. Their children, my nephew and niece whom I had never met, sat on her other side, looking deeply uncomfortable in their dark suits and dresses. Frances had spent the entire morning flawlessly performing the role of the beautiful, grieving daughter. She greeted every guest, accepted every condolence with a stoic nod, and even managed to summon a few tears during the eulogy. Not once did she so much as glance in my direction. When it was my turn to speak, a palpable hush fell over the congregation. I walked to the pulpit, suddenly feeling overwhelmed as I looked out at the crowd. The casket loomed before me, an American flag draped over it in honor of her military service. I hadn't seen Mom in person in almost 2 years, not since her second stroke had made travel nearly impossible for her. Now, I never would again. I looked up, my gaze locking with Frances's challenging stare, and somehow I found my voice. "My mother was a complicated woman," I began. "She was strong, willed, and traditional. She taught us the value of perseverance, sometimes through very difficult lessons." I swallowed hard, feeling the lump in my throat. We didn't always see eye to eye, but in recent years, we found our way back to each other. I saw Frances's head snap up, a flash of confusion crossing her face. Good. Just as Mom had predicted, she hadn't known about our reconciliation. "She told me once," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "that her greatest regret was the time we had lost, and that her greatest hope was that her children would find their way back to being a family again." I returned to my seat, feeling my sister's eyes boring into the side of my head. The rest of the service was a blur of hymns and platitudes. Soon enough it was over, and we were standing at the cemetery, watching in silence as they lowered Mom's casket into the ground beside Dad's grave. "Would have been nice if you'd run your speech by me first," Frances muttered as the mourners began to drift back toward their cars, "making it sound like you and Mom were close." "We were, in the end," she scoffed. "Right. Because weekly phone calls from halfway across the country makes you close. How would you know about our calls, Francis? Something flickered in her eyes. A brief flash of panic, quickly masked by anger. Figure of speech, Francis, Stephen interrupted, appearing at her elbow. Mr. Abernathy wants to know if you're coming to the reception. Up close I could see the strain around his eyes, the brittle quality of his smile. Hello, Arthur. I'm Stephen. We spoke on the phone once, years ago. I remembered. He had called to inform me that Francis didn't want me at their wedding. Nice to finally meet you, I said, accepting his limp handshake. You have wonderful children. Thank you. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Jacob and Michelle were excited to meet their uncle, weren't you? The two teenagers shuffled forward, their eyes fixed on the ground. Jacob, 16 and handsome, murmured a quiet hello. Michelle, younger by a couple of years, just nodded. Your grandmother talked about you sometimes, Jacob said suddenly, ignoring his mother's sharp look. She had your medical school graduation picture in her room. My throat tightened. Did she, Jacob? Frances warned, her voice sharp. Let's go. People are waiting. The reception was held at the community center, a predictable parade of casseroles and quiet condolences. I stood awkwardly by the coffee urn, watching Frances effortlessly command the room, receiving hugs and sympathetic touches. The prodigal son returned was clearly not welcome among the inner circle of mourners. She's enjoying this, you know, a gravelly voice said beside me. I turned to find Mr. Irwin Mackenzie, Mom's next-door neighbor for 40 years, leaning heavily on his cane, playing the grieving daughter. Your sister always did love being the center of attention. Hello, Mr. Mackenzie, I said, surprised he would approach me. It's been a long time, too long, he said, fixing me with a sharp gaze. Your mother missed you something fierce, especially after you two started talking again. I glanced around nervously, lowering my voice. You knew about that? Of course I did. Who do you think helped her set up that video call thing on her computer? Her hands were too shaky after the stroke. He took a sip of his punch. Frank didn't know. Your mother was real clear about that, said Frank would only interfere. Across the room, Frances was watching us, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Mr. Mackenzie, I asked, would you have time to talk later, privately? He nodded, understanding immediately. Come by after this circus is over. I've got some things your mother left for you anyway. I squeezed his hand gratefully just as Frances approached, inserting herself between us. Irwin, thank you for coming. Mom always appreciated your friendship. Her tone was warm, but her body language was a clear warning. I see you've reacquainted yourself with my brother. Never needed reacquainting, Irwin said tartly. Unlike some people, I kept up with both of Helen's children. He shuffled away, leaving Frances glaring after him. What did she mean by that? She asked. Who knows? She's getting senile, I replied, turning to her. Look, I know what you're doing. Trying to rewrite history now that Mom's gone. It won't work. Everyone here knows the truth. Do they, Frances? Do they know you've been intercepting my letters for years? That you told Mom I refused to speak to her when she first tried to reach out? Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Be careful, Arthur. You're not part of this family anymore. You don't get to come back now and stir up trouble. I'm not here to stir up trouble, I said quietly. I'm here to honor Mom and what she wanted. What she wanted, Frances repeated, a bitter smile twisting her lips. You have no idea what she wanted. But I did. It was all spelled out in the letter Mom had sent me 6 months ago. The letter, detailing her final wishes, the changes to her will, and most importantly, what she had discovered about the day I left home 30 years ago. The day Frances had finally gotten exactly what she wanted. Me gone, and Mom all to herself. The afternoon sun cast long, melancholic shadows across Mr. Mackenzie's porch as I knocked on his door. The reception had finally wound down, with Frances making it clear that she expected me back at the house for family discussions. I had promised to be there in an hour, which was all the time I had. Come in, Mr. Mackenzie called out, his voice stronger than his frail appearance suggested. The inside of his home smelled of cinnamon and old books, a scent that was both comforting and deeply familiar. "Tea's already on," he said, gesturing to a small table where 2 cups waited. "Your mother and I had tea every Thursday for 20 years. She'd want us to observe the tradition." I sat across from him, noticing the slight tremor in his hands as he poured. "How bad was it after I left?" I asked. He considered the question, slowly adding sugar to his cup. "Your mother was broken for a long time, wouldn't speak your name. Frances made sure of that." "What do you mean?" "Frances convinced your mother that you'd said terrible things when you left, that you hated her and never wanted to speak to her again." He sipped his tea, watching me over the rim of the cup. "Took me years to convince Helen that couldn't be right, that the boy I'd watched grow up wouldn't just cut ties so completely." My own hand shook, causing tea to spill onto the saucer. "Frances told Mom I hated her." He nodded gravely. "And intercepted your letters. I caught her once, taking mail from your mother's box. Claimed she was protecting Helen from more disappointment." The familiar sharp ache of betrayal spread through my chest. I had written dozens of letters those first few years, apologizing, explaining, begging to be allowed to come home. When no response ever came, I had eventually, painfully, stopped trying. 5 years after you left, your mother had a moment of clarity. Mr. Mackenzie continued. "Found one of your old letters Frances had missed. Started asking questions. That's when I told her I'd seen Frances taking her mail. That's when Mom reached out to me," I whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "Yes. Though I suspect Frances still managed to intercept most of her letters to you as well," he sighed, setting down his cup. "By the time you two finally reconnected, Frances had a stronghold on everything. The house, the finances, your mother's care. Helen was afraid of pushing her too hard." He stood up shakily and moved to a bureau in the corner. "Which brings me to why you're here." From a drawer, he pulled out a manila envelope, much like the one in my own suitcase. "Your mother left this with me 3 months ago. Made me promise I'd give it only to you, and only after she was gone." My throat tightened as I accepted the worn envelope. "Did you read it?" "No need. Helen told me what it contained." His eyes, roomy with age, but sharp with intelligence, met mine. "Letters she wrote to you that never got sent. Bank statements showing the money you sent for her care that she never received. And documents about the house." I frowned. "The house?" "Your grandfather's house. Your father's father. He left it to both you and Frances, equally, but Frances has been living there, claiming it as her own, since his death 15 years ago." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had never even known my grandfather had passed away, let alone that he had left me anything. "There's more," Mr. Mackenzie said, lowering himself back into his chair. "Your mother changed her will 6 months ago. Had a lawyer friend help her do it privately." "I know," I said quietly. "She told me in her last letter." He nodded, unsurprised. "Frances has been telling everyone you abandoned your mother, that you only came back now for the inheritance. But Helen knew the truth. She knew who really cared for her." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were the exact documents he had described, plus one more thing. A handwritten letter dated just 2 weeks before Mom's death. "Dearest Arthur," it began. "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've instructed Irwin to give you these papers only after the funeral because I know how Frances will react. I was a coward for too long, letting her control everything because it was easier than fighting. I won't be a coward in death." Tears blurred my vision as I read her confession of regret and her profound apology for believing my sister's lies for so many years. I read her words of gratitude for my forgiveness and for the financial support I had provided through her illness. "The new will makes everything right," Mom had written. "The truth will finally come out. I only hope you and Frances can someday heal what was broken." I carefully folded the letter, wiping my eyes. "Thank you for keeping this safe." Mr. Mackenzie reached across the table, his paper-thin skin cool against my hand. "Your mother loved you, Arthur. She made mistakes, terrible ones, but she loved you." "I know," I whispered. "I forgave her a long time ago." "It's not your mother who needs forgiveness now," he said, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward my childhood home where my sister waited. "It's your sister. The question is, after everything she's done, can you find it in your heart to forgive her too?" I tucked the envelope into my briefcase. The weight of its contents was nothing compared to the weight of the decision that lay ahead of me. In my suitcase back at Frances's house sat my own envelope of evidence, everything I had gathered over the years. Combined with what Mr. Mackenzie had just given me, I now had enough proof to completely destroy her. The question wasn't whether I could forgive her. The question was whether I would. Frances was waiting on the porch when I returned, her arms crossed and her face set in a grimace. The dusky evening light cast harsh shadows across her features, making her look older, harder. "The family meeting started 20 minutes ago," she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Everyone's waiting." "I didn't realize there was a schedule for grieving," I replied coolly, stepping past her into the house. The living room fell silent as I entered. Stephen sat primly on the edge of the sofa, while Jacob and Michelle huddled together in the window seat. A tall woman with severe-looking glasses stood by the fireplace, a folder in her hands. "This is Phyllis Warren, Mom's attorney," Frances said, closing the door behind me. "She's here to read the will." I met the lawyer's gaze. "Mrs. Warren? That's strange. My mother told me her attorney was Jane Hoffman." Mrs. Warren cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Hoffman handled some matters for your mother, yes, but I have been the Norton family attorney for 15 years. "I see." I set my briefcase down carefully, keeping the envelope from Mr. Mackenzie hidden inside. "Then please, proceed." Frances gestured for me to sit, her smile tight and strained. "We've already covered the preliminaries. Phyllis was just getting to the distribution of assets." The lawyer nodded, avoiding my eyes as she read from the document in her hands. "To my daughter, Frances Norton, I leave the family home at 847 Maple Street, all its contents, and my remaining financial assets, with the understanding that she will continue to manage these assets responsibly, as she has done throughout my illness." Frances' expression remained neutral, but I saw the slight, triumphant lift at the corner of her mouth. "To my son, Arthur Norton, Mrs. Warren continued, I leave my personal effects, including my military medals, photographs, and journals, with the hope that he will remember his mother kindly." That was it. Just trinkets and mementos, the inheritance of an estranged child. No mention of our grandfather's house, no mention of the new will. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady despite the furious pounding of my heart. Mrs. Warren nodded, closing the folder. "That concludes the will as filed with my office." Frances stood, extending her hand to the lawyer. "Thank you, Phyllis. We appreciate you coming out on such a difficult day." "Of course. My condolences again to the entire family." Mrs. Warren shook Frances's hand, nodded politely in my direction, and left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The front door closed with a soft click. For a moment, no one spoke. "Well," Francis said, finally turning to me with feigned sympathy. "I know this must be disappointing after coming all this way." "It's not about the inheritance, Francis." "Of course not," she agreed, her tone patronizing. "It's about honoring Mom, which you've done. So, I assume you'll be heading back tomorrow." Stephen stood abruptly. "Kids, let's give your mother and uncle some privacy. I'll start dinner." Jacob hesitated, his gaze lingering on me with unexpected sympathy before his father ushered him and his sister from the room. The door closed behind them, leaving Francis and me alone with 30 years of unspoken truths. "That wasn't Mom's real will," I said quietly. Francis' expression hardened. "Excuse me? You heard me. That wasn't the will Mom signed 6 months ago with Jane Hoffman." "You're delusional," Francis laughed, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Mom would never change her will without telling me. Like she'd never reconnect with me without telling you?" I reached into my briefcase, extracting the envelope. "I have proof, Francis, of everything. The new will, the letters you intercepted, the money you stole." She stared at the envelope, her face draining of color. "What the hell are you talking about? Mom and I have been in contact for years. Did you really think you could intercept every letter, every phone call? She knew what you were doing, Francis. Hiding my letters, stealing the money I sent, lying about me." "You're making this up," she said, her voice rising. "You abandoned us. You abandoned her. You don't get to rewrite history now that she's gone." I laid the papers on the coffee table one by one. "Bank transfers from my account to Mom's, with cash withdrawals made by you on the same day. Letters I sent that were found in your desk drawer. Mom's journals detailing your lies." Francis's hand shook as she leaned over the evidence. "This doesn't prove anything. And this," I said, placing the final document on the table, "is Mom's new will, legally witnessed and filed with Jane Hoffman. Equal distribution of all assets, including our grandfather's house, which you've been living in rent-free despite it being half mine." "This is forged," Francis hissed, but the raw panic in her eyes told me she knew it was real. "You had everything, Francis. The house, Mom's attention, the family you always wanted. But that wasn't enough, was it? You had to erase me completely. You left," she shouted, her mask of composure finally slipping. "You walked away from this family." "I was 16. Mom threw me out because of your lies, and you stood there and let it happen." Francis stepped back, as if I had struck her. "I didn't." "You told her I was sleeping with your best friend. You planted evidence, made her believe I was some kind of delinquent, all because you couldn't stand sharing her attention, especially after Dad died." The color drained completely from her face. "How did you—" "Mom figured it out years ago. She just didn't have the courage to confront you." I gathered the papers back into the envelope. "Tomorrow, I'm going to Mrs. Hoffman's office to officially file the real will. After that, we'll need to discuss what happens with the properties." Francis's eyes narrowed, calculation replacing shock. "No one will believe you. Not in this town. You're the son who ran away. I'm the daughter who stayed." "Maybe," I conceded. "But the law will believe these documents. And I think Stephen and your children should know the truth about the woman they're living with." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "How do you think Jacob would feel, knowing his mother drove her brother away when he was exactly Jacob's age?" For the first time, genuine fear flashed across her face. "You wouldn't." "I don't want to," I admitted, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. "I didn't come here for revenge, Francis. I came to honor Mom's wishes that her children find peace with each other. The question is, are you capable of that, or is your hatred of me still more important than everything else?" Morning light filtered through the guest room curtains as I packed my overnight bag. I had barely slept, listening to the sound of Francis's restless pacing downstairs for hours. The confrontation had left us both raw, decades of buried truths finally exposed to the air. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find Jacob standing awkwardly in the hallway, still in his pajamas. "Uncle Arthur?" His voice was hesitant. "Can I talk to you?" I stepped back, inviting him in. "Of course." He perched on the edge of the bed, his fingers twisting in the hem of his sleep shirt. "I heard you and Mom arguing last night." He looked up, his eyes so much like my own. "Is it true? Did she really make Grandma think you abandoned her?" I sat beside him, choosing my words carefully. "Family history is complicated, Jacob. Your mother and I have very different memories of the past. But Grandma's journal? You've read it?" I asked, surprised. He nodded. "She let me read parts sometimes, when Mom wasn't around. She wrote about you a lot, especially in the later entries." He pulled a small leather-bound book from his pocket. "I took this from her room yesterday. I thought you should have it." My hands trembled as I accepted the journal. "Does your mother know you have this?" "No. Mom never let anyone touch Grandma's things." He bit his lip. "There's an entry about you from just before Grandma got really sick, about how proud she was of you becoming a doctor, helping kids." I clutched the journal to my chest, a wave of emotion tightening my throat. "Thank you, Jacob. This means more than you know. I want to know the truth," he said, his voice suddenly fierce. "Not just Mom's version. You're the only one who can tell me." Before I could respond, heavy footsteps approached in the hallway. "Jacob?" Francis's voice called out. "What are you doing?" He stiffened, panic flashing across his face. I quickly slipped the journal into my bag, just as Francis appeared in the doorway, her expression darkening when she saw us together. "Breakfast is ready," she said tightly. "Your father's looking for you." Jacob stood, casting me an apologetic glance before slipping past his mother. Francis remained, filling the doorframe, her gaze fixed on my half-packed bag. "Running away again?" she asked coldly. "I'm meeting with Jane Hoffman at 10, I replied, continuing to pack. "I have a flight home tomorrow morning." "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You won't win, Arthur. This is my town, my family." "Our family," I corrected, "whether you like it or not." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Stephen's already upset. The kids are confused. Is that what you want? To tear apart another family?" The accusation stung, just as she knew it would. "I'm not the one who built a life on lies, Francis." Her jaw clenched. "I protected Mom from your betrayal. I was there when you weren't, because you made sure I couldn't be," I hissed, finally losing my composure. "You stole my letters, my money, my chance to make things right with her for years. I did what I had to do." "For who, Francis? For Mom or for yourself?" She had no answer, only seething silence. "I'll be back after my meeting with Mrs. Hoffman," I said, regaining control. "We can discuss the next steps then, unless you'd prefer to let the lawyers handle everything." Francis's expression shifted from pure anger to cold calculation. "Fine. We'll talk when you return. Civilly." Something in her tone set off warning bells. Francis never surrendered this easily. As soon as she left, I finished packing, making sure to include Mom's journal and both envelopes of evidence. I wasn't taking any chances leaving them in that house. Jane Hoffman's office was exactly as Mom had described it, modest, but impeccably maintained, with fishing trophies lining the walls. The attorney herself, a silver-haired woman with kind, intelligent eyes, rose to greet me. "Arthur, you look just like your father." She gestured to a chair. "I've been expecting you." I sat, placing Mom's envelope on her desk. "You know why I'm here." "Helen warned me there might be complications," she said, studying me. "I understand Phyllis Warren conducted a will reading yesterday." "Yes? A will that left everything to Frances?" Mrs. Hoffman nodded grimly. "I suspected as much. Your mother anticipated this. It's why we filed the new will with the county court directly, not just in my office." She tapped a folder on her desk. "It's already the legal document of record." Relief washed over me. "So Frances can't contest it?" "Oh, she can try, Mrs." Hoffman said dryly. "But she won't succeed." Helen was very thorough, had herself evaluated by 2 different doctors to establish mental competency, left video testimony explaining her decisions, even had your grandfather's will officially entered as evidence of Frances's pattern of financial manipulation. I let out a shaky breath. Mom always was meticulous when she set her mind to something. "Indeed," Mrs. Hoffman leaned forward. "But Arthur, there's something else you should know. Something Helen instructed me to tell you privately." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" "The new will isn't just about property division." Helen added a moral clause. She opened the folder, pointing to a paragraph. "If Frances formally acknowledges her previous deception and makes amends with you, Helen wanted her to retain the family home on Maple Street. A gesture of forgiveness, she called it." I stared at the clause, a war of emotions raging within me. "Mom was a better person than either of us deserved. She loved you both," Mrs. Hoffman said simply. "In her final months, that became her greatest concern, that her children might find peace. As I left the lawyer's office, that clause weighed heavily on me. It was Mom's final attempt to mend our broken family, to force a reconciliation even from beyond the grave. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the commotion at Frances's house, our house. As I drove up, fire trucks lined the street, their red lights flashing against the afternoon Sunday. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, watching as firefighters moved purposefully around the property. My heart lurched as I parked and ran toward the scene. The house itself wasn't burning, but firemen were examining the detached garage, which stood with its door wide open. "What happened?" I asked Mr. Mackenzie, who stood watching from his yard, his eyes wide with concern. "Small fire in the garage," he said. "They're saying it might have been deliberately set." "Where's Frances?" I scanned the crowd. He pointed to a police car parked across the street. Frances sat in the back seat, her head in her hands. "That's not all, mister," Mackenzie said, his voice dropping. "They found your mother's filing cabinets broken into, papers everywhere, some burned." A cold, sickening realization washed over me. Frances had been looking for Mom's evidence against her and had been willing to destroy everything to hide the truth. The police station smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner, a harsh, fluorescent reality after the emotional whirlwind of the past 2 days. I sat across from Detective Sanchez, answering questions about the fire, about Frances, about our family history. Stephen, huddled in a corner with Jacob and Michelle, his face pale and drawn. "Mr. Norton," Detective Sanchez said, glancing at her notes, "your sister claims she was simply searching for important documents when a fire started accidentally, and you don't believe her." I said. It wasn't a question. "The fire marshal found traces of an accelerant. This was not an accident." She studied me carefully. "You don't seem surprised." I wasn't. The desperate woman I had confronted last night was capable of anything. What happens now? We're holding her for questioning. Depending on the evidence, she could face charges for arson, destruction of evidence, and possibly insurance fraud. The gravity of the situation settled over me. This was far beyond sibling rivalry now, beyond even the inheritance dispute. Frances had crossed a line that could cost her everything: her freedom, her family, and what little respect she still commanded in this town. "Can I speak with her?" I asked. Detective Sanchez hesitated. "Briefly. I'll have an officer escort you." Frances sat hunched at a metal table in an interview room, looking smaller and somehow diminished. She didn't look up when I entered, just continued staring at her hands. "They're saying I could get 5 years, she said, her voice hollow. "Stephen's already talking about moving back to his parents' place with the kids." I sat across from her, saying nothing. The silence stretched between us, 30 years of it, until finally she looked up. "Why did you come back, Arthur? After all this time, why couldn't you just stay away?" "Because Mom asked me to make peace with you," I said, the truth feeling strangely liberating. Her last wish was for us to be a family again. Frances laughed bitterly. "Family? What does that even mean anymore?" "I don't know," I admitted. But setting fire to the garage wasn't the answer. I panicked. For the first time, there was no defensiveness in her voice, just tired resignation. "I thought if I could find those papers, destroy the evidence. It wouldn't have mattered, Frances. The will is already filed with the court. There are copies of everything." She closed her eyes, defeat written in every line of her face. "Then it's over. I've lost everything." I studied my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative tyrant of the past few days, but the scared girl who'd lost her father too young, who'd clung to her mother's approval with a desperate intensity, and who'd pushed away anyone who threatened her fragile sense of security. "Not everything," I said quietly. Her eyes opened, suspicious. "Mom included a moral clause in the will." I leaned forward. "If you publicly acknowledge what you did and make amends, you keep the house on Maple Street." Disbelief crossed her face. "Why would she do that?" "Because she loved you, Frances, despite everything. And you? After everything I've done, you'd honor that clause?" I took a deep breath. "I didn't come back for revenge. I came for resolution." She stared at me, searching my face for deception. "You could let me go to jail, take everything. Is that what you'd do if our positions were reversed?" Her silence was answer enough. "I spoke to Detective Sanchez," I continued. "If you make full restitution for the damage and agree to counseling, she believes the DA might consider dropping the more serious charges." "Why would you help me?" Frances asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Because carrying hatred for 30 years nearly destroyed you, Frances," I said. "I don't want it to destroy me too. Think about it. Not just for your sake, but for Stephen and the kids." The next morning, Frances signed a full confession. Not just for the fire, but for her decades of deception. She admitted to intercepting my letters, to hiding Mom's attempts to contact me, and to siphoning away the money I'd sent for our mother's care. The hardest confession came last, admitting she had lied about me as a teenager, fabricating stories that led to Mom throwing me out. The DA, as Detective Sanchez predicted, reduced the charges to criminal mischief and agreed to probation rather than jail time. Frances would keep her freedom, if not her pride. The reading of the real will took place that afternoon in Mrs. Hoffman's office. Stephen sat rigidly beside Frances, still processing the revelations about the woman he had married. Jacob and Michelle flanked them, while I sat alone across the polished table. To be divided equally between my children, Frances and Arthur Norton, Mrs. Hoffman read, "The family home at 847 Maple Street, my share of Norton Manufacturing, and all associated assets." She continued with specific bequests. Mom's military memorabilia to Jacob, her book collection to Michelle, Dad's jewelry split between me and Stephen. Then came the moral clause. Should Frances Norton acknowledge her past actions and make sincere amends with her brother, ownership of the family home shall transfer solely to her. with the understanding that it will eventually pass to her children. Stephen's hand found Frances's, squeezing it gently, the first sign of warmth between them since her confession. When the reading finished, Frances cleared her throat. "I'd like a moment alone with my brother." Everyone filed out, leaving us facing each other. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Frances said simply. "Probably not," I agreed. "But Mom thought you deserved a second chance. And looking at Jacob and Michelle, I think I do too. I've been horrible to you." Her voice cracked. "For years I convinced myself I was protecting Mom, protecting our family. But I was just protecting myself, my position. I was terrified of losing the only parent we had left." "I know," I said quietly. "I never wanted to take her from you, Frances. I just wanted to be part of her life too." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Stephen wants us to start family counseling. All of us, he says. He says Jacob and Michelle deserve to know their uncle." She looked up, her expression hesitant. "Would you consider visiting sometimes? Not now, but maybe. Eventually." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. That would take time, if it ever came at all. But it was a beginning, fragile and uncertain. "I'd like that," I said. "And Frances, I'm keeping Mom's journals, but I'll make copies for Jacob and Michelle. They should know who their grandmother really was." She nodded, a mixture of regret and relief crossing her face. "Thank you." 2 days later, I stood at Mom's grave, placing fresh flowers beside the headstone. The cemetery was peaceful, autumn leaves drifting lazily across the well-tended grass. "I did what you asked," I said softly. "It's not perfect, but it's a start." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, carrying the scent of earth and grass and memories. I thought of the sign Frances had greeted me with at the airport. "Welcome, disappointment." And I realized how wrong she had been. I hadn't come as a disappointment, but as the bearer of a painful but necessary truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. "When will you visit again? Thanksgiving, maybe?" I smiled, typing back. "I'd like that. Save me a seat at the table." As I walked back to my rental car, I felt lighter. The burden of the past hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, making room for something new to grow. Not the family I had lost 30 years ago. That could never be restored. But perhaps, in time, a different kind of family could grow in its place. One built not on secrets and control, but on the truth and forgiveness that Mom had hoped for in her final days. I took one last look at the Norton family plot before driving away. The disappointment hadn't been me. It had been the walls we built between us, the lies we told ourselves, and the years we had wasted. But disappointment wasn't our ending. It was just a chapter in a story that was still being written. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.